So with Scream 7, that's my wish, is that you put Kevin Williamson there and the care that he has for the Sidney Prescott character, and you can deliver a movie that can close that story. I don't want to see Neve Campbell dragged into too many sequels moving forward, but I do kind of want to wrap that up and figure out what the next ones are going to be. This is the Box Office Podcast. I'm Daniel Loria, the editorial director of Box Office Pro, the pulse of theatrical exhibition. And in this week's podcast, I'm joined by Chad Kennerk and Rebecca Pahle to go over the box office franchise history of Scream, the film that reinvented the slasher and ushered in a new era of horror movies way back in the 90s. That series is still alive and stabbing today with the newest release, Scream 7, directed by original screenwriter Kevin Williamson, coming into theaters this Friday. Rebecca, Chad, I'm excited to get started here because we've been rewatching all 6 prior Scream movies in preparation for this episode. I'm trying to get tickets this weekend if the never-ending snow allows me to leave my home. Rebecca, I don't know if you're going to make it to the All Media this week. What are your plans to watch this?
The All Media is tomorrow, so yeah, we might be getting some snow tomorrow, so I think that will all depend. But I got Eric out to see the Elvis concert film, which we both enjoyed, so I don't want to push my luck with getting us out into the elements too much.
How about you, Chad? Are you planning on seeing it this week, or have you already caught a media screening over in Denver?
No, actually, there isn't a press screening here. So I'm trying to figure out when I will be able to see it. I've got some weekend plans, so we'll see if there's a slot next week that I can catch it.
I think that's unfortunately more or less the vibe coming into this weekend, because the tracking here is fantastic. I think that Super Bowl trailer worked. Casting Neve Campbell and putting her at the center of the marketing campaign is also a very good idea, considering that you have a retool of the directing team coming in for the sequel. Neve Campbell, absent from Scream 6, coming back in Scream 7, basically because the last 2 stars dropped out of the project. Melissa Barrera was fired a couple of years back. And then Jenna Ortega, in an unrelated dismissal, actually decided not to come back for this installment.
Jenna Ortega is busy.
Yeah, her career clearly taking a different direction, which is fine. I think, exciting for Jenna Ortega. We'll see how Scream 7 ends up. I think that's one of the big question marks we had coming into this weekend. How is the change of approach coming to Scream 7 going to impact tracking? So far, it's tracking for a franchise best opening weekend. To be quite honest, we're looking at an opening weekend range between $45 and $60 million. The last high water mark domestically for the Scream franchise came with Scream 6, released back in 2023. That opened to $44 million. Now, the reason we have such a wide range here is that if there wasn't a snow apocalypse in the entire northeast of the country, we would be a lot more confident this would be a $50 million plus opening weekend. But because folks like myself, like Rebecca, like folks in many other parts of the country are probably going to find it hard to get over to theaters, we are anticipating maybe that demand to extend to week 2 and an opening weekend around the mid $40 million range, more or less on par with Scream 6. That's right now where we're tracking it. It can go either way just because of these weather elements. But suffice to say, we are on pace by the looks for a record opening weekend for a franchise that is still alive and kicking after more than 30 years in theaters. It's incredible to say that out loud. Chad, you told me you caught the original in a re-release not that long ago at Alamo Drafthouse in Denver.
Yeah, it was a great experience to see it on a big screen, because I think we talked previously that with that original, we were all too young to have gone and seen it in theaters. So it was kind of one of those slumber party, the big brother rented the VHS tape kind of situation. So it was great to be in a theater and see it with an audience, because I felt like it played really well on a big screen.
Now let's go back to the original to get this conversation started, because the original release comes out in the Christmas corridor of 1996. How it gets to the Christmas corridor is a conversation unto itself. But the real origin of this title goes back to the slasher era, goes back to the VHS era, fittingly, because this is a film that I discovered on VHS like you guys. But going back to 1996, it may not seem that way, guys, but at that point, we're only 10 years removed from the golden age of the slasher, where there is a saturation in the home video market, and theatrically as well, of the slasher subgenre within horror films. They seem to be everywhere, endless sequels. You're at a point where genre tropes become conventions, become eye-rolling aspects to watching these movies. But of course, there seems to be a fandom that also brews during this era and kind of settles into the mid-90s. But by the time we get to the mid-90s, that heyday of the slasher movie is done. The slasher movie is tired of the big bad monster or the big bad killer with a knife chasing around usually women, is tired, is done for, and that creates the perfect opportunity for a young screenwriter in Kevin Williamson to look at all of these tropes, look at all of these conventions, and satirize them not as a comedy, but as a retooled horror film in a way where it's because it plays with the conventions, it's because it's self-aware of these tropes that the movie largely works. I don't know how you guys feel about that aspect of these movies.
That's why the first one works so well for me. And honestly, that's a large part of the reason why the sequels do not. We'll get into Scream 2 in a bit, but it's the most frustrating of the franchise for me because you have, Scream characters talking about, oh, don't do this thing that everyone does it in a slasher film and dies. And then Jamie Kennedy does it and he dies. I feel like we've definitely lost that element of it in the franchise as of late. One thing that I would have expected and would be interested to see from this franchise is the very, very blurred lines between horror and true crime. I mean, we see that in Courtney Cox's character and Gail Weathers, how there's always been that sort of connection, that sort of uneasy alliance. But I mean, if you look at things now, like the tragedy unfolding with Nancy Guthrie, how cops are having a tough time with that one because, YouTube investigative journalists are doing their little keyboard investigation stuff. I mean, really the blending of true crime and actual people being harmed and entertainment. I don't know how you would, I don't know how you would pull that off in a Scream franchise movie.
I love the scrappy origins of it with Kevin Williamson spending 3 days to just knock out this script called Scary Movie about, and talking about the true crime element about the Gainesville Ripper, right? He saw this documentary and that's what inspired the story. I think for me, it's definitely tied in with nostalgia. It's tied into part of my entry into the genre. I definitely had that mask on one of my Halloween costumes and was running around chasing people.
So my brothers would fight each other for who got that Halloween mask.
Yeah. So for me, it's definitely keyed in with all that nostalgia, which is why I'm excited about 7, because there are a lot of elements there that I think are taking it back to the origins.
Daniel, I'm curious about something because I guess we're all kind of roughly in the same age group, I think, same year or two. I saw Scream before I ever saw all of the movies that were referenced in Scream. I saw Scream before I saw Halloween, before Friday the 13th. I mean, I liked that meta element because it felt like I was getting into something. It felt like I was in on something. But Scream was my entry point for the, quote unquote, essential horror canon. I think I'd probably seen Psycho before Scream, but honestly, I was not so into horror before seeing that film.
That's a really good point, because I think a lot, and by the way, I'm 40, I'll say it out loud. I think a lot of people in our age range see Scream as a seminal movie in why we fell in love with the horror genre. That's definitely my case. It was one of the movies that I think, maybe out of a short list of a dozen, that changed my life in watching movies. As a cinephile, this is highly influential because in the same way that, I don't know if you guys remember those stay away from drugs programs in the 90s, how they spoke about, cannabis and other drugs as gateway drugs, where if you take one drug, you'll end up taking 15 others and just spiral downward. Well, it was those stay away from drugs programs that always coined the term gateway drug. And I don't really think that ever fit with narcotics. I think, there's other elements that go into, obviously the science of addiction. But there are such a thing as gateway movies and gateway books, where you are exposed to something at an age where you're discovering your own tastes, maybe 12, 13, 14, where you realize that you can listen to music that your parents don't listen to. You can watch TV shows and movies and read books that your parents don't engage with. And Scream comes out during this time in my life, and it introduces me to a lot of slashers. Now, unlike you, I had already seen Psycho, and Psycho is probably in an even shorter list of movies that definitely changed my life.
Yeah, that's the one that that VHS was watched in my house pre-Scream. But all of I'm like, who is that guy in the striped shirt with the mop?
Right. You might not have gotten those references, but Psycho definitely, I think, is you have your entryway to horror. I mean, for me, my entryway to horror was my mom telling me about Brian De Palma movies that she saw as a young adult, obviously in her 20s, and then realizing, well, you can't show an 8-year-old a De Palma movie, but you can show them the next best thing, which is Hitchcock, where obviously De Palma takes a lot from. So through my mother's love of Brian De Palma and her, let's say, fandom of Hitchcock, I end up getting into Hitchcock horror. Obviously, Psycho is foundational. I get so much into Psycho, into how you can tell a story visually and how you can use visual language to present a mystery in a way that you couldn't in any other format. That leads me into Halloween, which is the prototypical slasher beyond Psycho, right? Those are the two sort of building blocks. So by the time I get to Scream, I had already seen those two movies and kind of can guide my way through that conversation. I think that helps a lot of folks, but like you, I think a lot of folks maybe entered this at that generation without having necessarily seen everything that came before it in that 1980s horror saturation.
I mean, it's just a good movie. It's just a good horror movie, aside from cultural reference points. And speaking as someone who, when I saw Scream for the first time and when I, watched it repeatedly, wearing that VHS out as a teenage girl getting into horror movies, I definitely appreciated Scream more for, just the way it treated its female characters, the lack of nudity, the sort of joking about, I mean, a lot of, there are, I think it's reductive to say that horror and slashers in particular are necessarily, misogynist in nature, but a lot of them are.
Yeah, a lot of them are. And there's obviously great works of feminist film criticism around this. Probably one of the best known works in that sort of genre of film criticism is Carol J. Clover's Men, Women, and Chainsaws, which I think is one of the best books on this type of material that I've ever read. I highly, highly recommend that book. A very accessible piece of feminist film criticism. But ultimately, this is a series, guys, that doesn't just come out of a fandom for horror movies and where horror was at that moment. The influences for Kevin Williamson's original screenplay titled Scary Movie, as Chad notes, are actually 5 big aspects coming in. And this is where I'm going to give a big shout out to a book that came out very recently, where I'm going to be taking a lot of discussion points from. This is Ashley Cullen's Your Favorite Scary Movie, How the Scream Films Rewrote the Rules of Horror. That book came out last year. A lot of great conversation points that we're going to bring up here. So a big, big credit to Ashley Cullen and her work. But based on what I read there, Ashley notes 5 big influences. First of which is Agatha Christie novels, the whodunit element. That is huge in these movies. These movies work because you don't know who's behind the mask, and they're humans. It's not this supernatural monster like Freddy, like Jason, like Michael Myers. It's someone you know. That's actually part of the entire Scream franchise, is the killer is always someone you know. And that connects directly to another element that Chad brought up earlier, the true crime documentary. Kevin Williamson, very, very highly inspired by the true crime documentary, by the saturation of TV trials during this era. Of course, the O.J. Simpson trial happening in the 1990s, mid-1990s, before this movie comes out, being a big focal point of American life. Of course, the slasher movies that we mentioned a second ago, all the tropes, all the conventions that had existed before. But crucially, Kevin Williamson says that Into the Woods, the musical, was a big inspiration for this film. And it makes perfect sense. What is Into the Woods other than a deconstruction of the narrative tropes of fairy tales? And it was in watching Into the Woods where Kevin Williamson reportedly sees that musical and says, hey, we could probably do something like this with horror and come out with something really, really interesting. And then finally, the giallo influence, the giallo subgenre in horror coming out from Italy, where there is a masked or a concealed killer going out, conducting a lot of these violent crimes. That's also in the background. A lot of these films, something that obviously director Wes Craven notes in putting a lot of Dario Argento touches to that opening sequence in the original Scream. But those 5 elements, I think, form a big part of what makes Scary Movie Scream. And then finally, the biggest part of the puzzle here, at least for American audiences, is that presidential campaign that Bob Dole had back in the mid-90s running against Bill Clinton, where a central part of his messaging becomes the threat of movie violence on society. How American society was becoming violent because of the movies. And there was a lot of, let's say, concern from different political figures. There was a big societal backlash from conservative media saying that movies and video games were too violent. If you remember, this is around the time when Mortal Kombat 2 was coming out, and Mortal Kombat 2 was seen as this horrible satanic force in the influence, not too far removed from the satanic panic of daytime television and all that embellishment.
Across the aisle, too. I mean, was it Tipper Gore?
Oh, absolutely. I don't want to make this seem just as a Democratic only thing. Tipper Gore and the Democrats obviously making this a huge talking point. If I'm not mistaken, I believe Hillary Clinton was also
she was video
big on
games.
this messaging. Yeah, Hillary Clinton was on the video game side. But yeah, this was a part, you're absolutely right, Rebecca, where across the aisle, Republicans and Democrats are warning that children are being corrupted by violence in media, just completely eye roll worth of talking points that absolutely don't pan out. And Kevin Williamson, mixing all of these aspects in society in his brain, comes out with a fantastic screenplay that absolutely delivers. And now let's start talking about putting this movie together, because the casting, I think, is fascinating, starting with Drew Barrymore, who is introduced as maybe the final girl in the opening sequence, right, as our protagonist, marketed as a protagonist of this film.
The poster girl. I mean, literally.
The poster girl does a lot of the media, in anticipation of this film, and, is pretending that she's on this movie the whole time. And this is where the film takes a big cue from Janet Leigh's performance and presence in Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, where you get the big star that you build a big marketing campaign around. You kill him early on in a fantastic, iconic scene. That opening sequence in Wes Craven's Scream, those opening 15 minutes with Drew Barrymore, I think set the stage for everything. Few movies work 30 years because of the power of the first 15 minutes. I think that's the case. Chad, can you take me back to those first 15 minutes of watching this? And by the way, do you remember the sleepover that you watched this in by any chance?
Yeah, I just remember it being on the edge of our seats. And it is that Hitchcock MacGuffin of, oh my gosh, I can't believe that this movie just did that. Like, where is it going to go from here?
And the fact that her character wasn't even, I mean, the nihilism and the pointlessness of it, it's simply she was killed because one of the killers had a crush on her and broke up with her. She broke up with him. It just really, it takes this concept that every kill has to be tied into some larger societal issue. And it's just like, no, sometimes people just do this sort of thing.
No, it's a slow burn of a moment. I think it's a very patient and confident opening 15 minutes that Wes Craven directs beautifully. I would argue maybe Wes Craven's best directed sequence in his career. And that's saying something because he's directed many great sequences. I can't name one that tops this.
Definitely none of the sequels. I mean, all the sequels have tried to recreate that sort of cold open, and it's like, it just don't, stop.
I mean, maybe something in Nightmare on Elm Street you could cite as like, hey, this maybe works a little bit better. But the confidence that Wes Craven has in that opening sequence, I think just sets the tone. And this is a project, honestly, that Wes Craven wanted nothing to do with. Wes Craven, like many other horror directors, felt shoehorned into the horror genre, really wanted to step away from it, agrees to do it just out of the power of the script alone, and then goes through a casting process that, once you figure out that twist with Drew Barrymore at the start, you kind of settle in with other folks. Now, to be fair, the opening sequence with the original kill, you had other big name actors considered for that role. Alicia Silverstone, I think a year or two removed from Clueless, was tipped to be that opening girl in that opening sequence. I think that would have worked really well, actually. I think she was also at that height of popularity. And then for the rest of the cast, which honestly is maybe another huge strength of this original, is just how they nailed the casting right. You had Brittany Murphy considered for the role of Sidney Prescott that goes to Neve Campbell, that at this point, I don't think anyone can imagine these movies without Neve Campbell. Natasha Lyonne was considered for Tatum, a role that I think Rose McGowan completely nailed down perfectly. And then Brooke Shields was considered for the Gale Weathers role that eventually went obviously to Courtney Cox. Now, I think that would have been very compelling casting, but ultimately I can't imagine this movie working quite as well as it does with anybody else in it. Now, Rebecca, we know that Chad saw this at a slumber party. I saw this at a slumber party. I saw it at a slumber party in Sao Paulo, Brazil, when I was living there at the time. Do you remember the slumber party you saw this in?
In my mind, I have always watched Scream. There was never a time when I had not seen Scream. It was me and my brothers just sitting around, parents were working. We would just watch the same 6 VHS tapes all the time. We would tease the youngest brother because he had a crush on Neve Campbell. It was just always something that we watched. And to your point about the casting, specifically Courtney Cox, I mean, the chemistry she has with David Arquette in that first movie is legit. And it really does a lot for that movie. It feels like so many factors just came together to make it work. And they've really had great chemistry. And then obviously they got married. All these little fortuitous circumstances.
Drew Barrymore, too, when she was initially attached, I think she was the first attached and she kind of had her pick of roles. And she wanted that opening sequence. And I think that's part of why that works so well. And it becomes almost a mini movie in and of itself.
The Hollywood legacy element of it just dovetails so nicely with everything else.
Well, yeah, I think that's a symbolic kill, right? You're basically symbolically killing off Hollywood royalty. You're killing off the past, right? You're basically saying, hey, you think you know what a slasher is. We're going to reinvent that before your eyes here. And I don't want to forget the casting of Skeet Ulrich and Matthew Lillard, who I think are wonderful. I think they have great chemistry with each other and everyone else. But at the heart of this movie, why the twist in Scream 1, and by the way, if you hadn't noticed already, this is full of spoilers. If you're actually listening to this, just accept it. We're going to spoil all of them for you.
If you have not seen Scream somehow, just stop listening. It's the only time we'll say stop listening to this episode.
Yeah.
But the big reveal of Skeet Ulrich as being one of the killers, I think works because the romance between him and Neve Campbell works so well in the movie because you buy into it. It reminds me of something that one of my grad school professors, Richard Allen, would say about Vertigo, that the only reason why Vertigo works as a movie is you buy the connection between Jimmy Stewart and Kim Novak. If you buy that romance in Vertigo, you buy the whole movie. And I think it's the same thing here. If you buy the romance between Neve Campbell and Skeet Ulrich, the whole movie works as a whole. If you don't really buy that romance, I think it collapses. And that twist ending that the first movie had, I think also sets the tone. I didn't see that coming at all, guys. 2 killers? That surprised me. And I was excited.
It's wild that is so surprising. It's it's wild looking back, how revolutionary that felt. I mean, something that in rewatching everything in the lead up to recording this episode, one thing I'd kind of forgotten is how much the plot of the first movie and of the entire franchise hinges around this very salacious true crime event that happened a year before the movie even started taking place. I mean, and then the fact that, Skeet Ulrich's character was motivated by that in the past and situations that went on with their parents. It really speaks to the way the past kind of intersects and gets refracted through genre tropes to generate something new. But they were both. I mean, Skeet Ulrich is that was a powerful performance for a teenage girl to watch.
Right. And Lillard as well. I mean, I think there's a reason why they keep on bringing them back in any capacity that they can.
They haven't really brought back Stu. Apparently he's
wait for 7. Yeah, there's a hint there that I haven't seen it yet, but I keep on hearing, hey, They're going to work Matthew Lillard into the story somehow. But I think there's a reason why, because they were so good. And also, Jamie Kennedy playing the role of Randy, so good that they end up kind of having to figure out how you sneak a cameo in there, even after he's killed off in the sequel. But that core cast is so incredibly good that it makes this from a horror movie into a franchise. But let's talk about the release here, guys, because there were two very controversial changes that the Weinstein brothers, producers on this film through Dimension Films, end up enacting ahead of release. The first of which, they changed the title of the movie from Scary Movie to Scream, which nobody liked. That was very, very controversial at the time. The second change, which is the riskiest change they possibly could have done, is having this movie come out on December 20th, 1996. Basically Christmas weekend, betting that college students coming back for their winter breaks would rush to this movie. They ended up getting a box office hit, the first Scream opening to a very modest $6 million back on December 20th, 1996, ends up getting a long run during the winter holiday break for college students, ends up grossing $103 million domestically. But like you guys, and like a lot of folks I imagine that are listening to this episode, the real power of Scream comes in that home entertainment window. After all that word of mouth basically just trickles down to Blockbuster Video, and this movie is off the shelves and gets bought on VHS, just off the charts. This is one of those movies that I think I wore down that VHS tape to almost nothing.
Obviously, the most iconic scene is that opening, but that final act is so amazing. And it is set up, and it is a slumber party with people watching old horror movies on VHS. I mean, there was a moment earlier in the film where you have people flocking to the generic Blockbuster equivalent because there's a curfew and they have to stay indoors. It felt by youth for youth in a way.
Yeah.
Obviously it wasn't, but like as a youth, it felt like this was for us.
It winked at cinephiles. It kind of connected with you in that I know the language you speak and I will speak it with you.
But it wasn't trying to be clever about it or forceful about it, or to like, I feel like sometimes in the more recent Scream movies, it can get a little bit too.
I think this is a title that finds that success with that audience in a very specific window of time. And that, of course, leads the conversation of creating a sequel. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky. And this is where I think things start taking bad decisions and rushing sequels. Scream opens in the Christmas corridor of 1996. And almost instantly, as soon as those box office receipts in week 2, week 3, week 4 start coming in, a decision is made by the Weinsteins. We want to make the sequel when Neve Campbell and Courtney Cox are next available from their TV obligations. And that's May. So imagine that. Imagine having this movie come out, not being an opening weekend hit, waiting until January to realize what you have and saying, get a script ready because we're shooting in 4 months. Because if we don't shoot in 4 months, we're going to have to wait for the following May when 2 of my co-stars are available to shoot again, and we might lose the momentum. And that's exactly what happens. The problem here is by this point, Kevin Williamson is busy developing another iconic teenage show of that era, Dawson's Creek. So while Williamson is busy launching Dawson's Creek Season 1, he's tasked to sort of going through as many versions of a script they can rush through, anything possible so they can just streamline Scream 2 into production. And I'm sorry, guys. I think it shows. I know there's people that love Scream 2. I'm not one of them. Chad, I know you're one of them. I know you defend this movie. Let's start with you. When did you watch Scream 2, and what is it about it that you love?
I'm kind of like Rebecca, and like all of my memories around Scream are like slightly fuzzy, other than maybe
it feels you've always had them.
Yeah, they've always been around. But I think at the time, it felt like those movies always felt like a little dangerous, a little like I was discovering something or watching something I wasn't supposed to.
Scream 2, like, oh, they're going off to college.
Yeah, they're going to college, which, that is a whole thing in and of itself, right? When you watch characters that are in college and you're, much younger, and you sort of imagine what that experience is going to be like,
No, but I completely agree with you, Chad, because that was the appeal of the first Scream for me, because I was in middle school and it comes out. And here you have these high schoolers that all speak in cultural references, that love watching movies, and it seemed like an exciting place to be in my
And their
life.
parents are never around.
Never around. Yeah, God knows why. But no, that was, I think, a big part of the appeal for me as well. And going back to what you said, Chad, that's the age around the middle school era where watching a horror movie felt like an illicit thing, felt like you were doing something you weren't supposed to do. A lot of my love from horror also stems from going to the video store and seeing all these boxes with just great box art of 1980s slashers and horror movies and being terrified at what might be in that tape. I would pick up the tapes at the video store and like look at the back and just look at the different stills they'd have to sort of imagine the movie in my head, because I was too much of a chicken to actually sit down and watch them. So whenever I did make that commitment of like, okay, I'm brave enough to watch this, it was a big decision for me. That was a big Friday, Saturday night to sit through a horror movie at home.
You had to gear up. You had to pop that popcorn, hope the phone didn't ring.
Rebecca, do you remember watching Scream 2?
I know I did in the late 90s, it must have been. I know I didn't really wait too long to see it, but no, I don't like it. It's like how people say that Revenge of the Sith is the best Star Wars prequel. It's not because it's good.
People say that?
Don't get me started on the Star Wars prequels.
No, I agree with
their
you. They're all bad.
rehabilitation, but
No, they're all
Yeah.
awful. I don't. There's nothing good to say about any of them. I'm surprised people feel that way.
I definitely like 4 better than 2. 2 and 3 might be tied for worst for me. I just do not like 2 because it feels like it gets down to that one scene where you have, Gale Weathers and Dewey and Randy in the campus quad, realizes that Ghostface is watching them. He calls them. Very scary moment, and it's bright, sunshiny out. There are people around playing frisbee. It's that dichotomy between a very kind of wholesome, high energy setting, and then obviously what's going to happen. But then Gale and Dewey go off to look for Ghostface somewhere else, and Jamie Kennedy, who ostensibly is the guy who knows what not to do in horror movies, the horror movie expert, decides to walk around on his own and take a pause right next to an unmarked van, a parked unmarked van. And it just felt like it was
It felt dishonest to the character.
It felt insulting the intelligence of its viewers, of the genre.
No, the movie doesn't work for me either, but I'm on board. I remember watching this for the first time, like my first couple of weeks living in Miami. So we just moved from Sao Paulo, Brazil to Miami, Florida. And I remember renting 2 movies at the time. So I was obsessed with Scream, and I was obsessed with Halloween. And I remember renting Halloween 2 and Scream 2 at the same time. So also, I missed this theatrically, obviously. And I remember not loving either of them and being a little bit disappointed by both of them. And I don't know if not loving Halloween 2 also informed my not loving Scream 2. But I will say the opening sequence of Scream 2, I think, works perfectly. The one in the movie theater with Jada Pinkett Smith, or Jada Pinkett at that point.
So that was the element.
12 minutes long, like the original. You take your time. It's a confident, sort of slow burn of an opening sequence. Everybody's wearing the costume. This is in a movie theater, right? The way a lot of folks experience the first Scream movie. And you play with the whole trope of who's behind the mask. Well, everybody's behind the mask. You're at a premiere. You're at a premiere event. And in probably the second most disturbing thing that could happen in a movie theater bathroom, with Jada Pinkett's boyfriend getting stabbed through the ear in a stall, leading towards, her very iconic murder in that opening sequence, I was in. I fall out of favor with Scream 2 for the same reasons that Rebecca notes. I think the characters stop acting in a way that's honest with who they've been established being in the original.
In the first one, you have Sidney Prescott, like that first phone call she has with Ghostface. She's like, "I'm watching you. I'm on the porch," and she calls his bluff on it. The one thing I do like about Scream 2, I like that introduction of the Stab franchise within a franchise. How very early on it felt like there was that just bit of originality, or that little wink that you had all throughout the first one, just in the fact that these characters are like, oh yeah, okay, somebody adapted Gale Weathers' book, like we're being exploited for entertainment,
Right.
Good times.
I think obviously the sequence that you talk about with killing off Randy, which is I think a contentious scene for fans, I don't think they should have killed off Randy in Scream 2 in the same way that I don't think they should have killed off Apollo Creed in Rocky 4. I think those are franchise mistakes, and getting rid of a central cornerstone to your franchise way too early. But getting rid of Randy did add stakes. And I think what worked for me in that scene, which largely does not work for me, is the fact that I did not see that happening, and that it's a kill that happens in broad daylight, which isn't usually what happens in a slasher. Slashers, you think of kills that happen at night through the cloak of darkness. This is a broad daylight in a public place kill. And it does that very successfully. I will give it credit for that. But beyond that, going into the third act of the film, I think the movie just falls apart. I remember a big aspect of it that I did like, that also did influence me, is learning for the first time there are film classes in college and that you can major in watching movies. I have 2 degrees in watching movies. I make a career in watching movies. My mind was blown at that point. I'm like, no, you mean math is bullshit? You mean I don't have to pay attention in physics or chemistry?
I can be young Timothy Oliphant.
Yeah, I want to be in class with those guys. I want to talk about aliens and Terminator. I don't want to learn chemistry. This is great. So that was another highly influential part of the sequel that I very much dug.
It feels like they tried to take the characters who died in the first one and just make them again, like, all right, Rose McGowan's dead. Here, have Sarah Michelle Gellar, TV supernatural, which as a big Buffy fan, I was like, why is she not in this more?
Yes.
You don't do anything with her at all.
I think if you had gotten her instead of Jada Pinkett in that opening sequence, of course, you lose the meta commentary of there's no black people in slasher movies. And when they are in slasher movies, they get killed off. That gets played with, obviously, at the beginning of Scream 2, where you actually open with black characters who, by the way, that demographic massively over-indexes when it comes to horror movies. And you see how black audiences experience and enjoy movies where they're largely absent in terms of representation. So that meta element's there. You would lose that by putting Sarah Michelle Gellar in the opening sequence. So I'm not convinced this is the right way. But I think the twist of having Buffy the Vampire Slayer killed off in your movie is wasted.
Did Sarah Michelle Gellar's character even know any of the, Nev Campbell, Sidney? I mean, she was in class. She was in class.
Right,
she was a classmate of Randy's. Why? It's not even a group of friends situation. It's the killer targeting people who have the same names. I do like, in retrospect, about the twist with it being Mrs. Loomis, that, watching it back, how every time she's around pestering Gail Weathers about local news scoops, and she sees that Sidney Prescott's about to show up, she dips. I like that sort of element of, Nev Campbell knew who this person was. It's like if she'd seen her somewhere around, she would have put that together.
Seems like such a cheap foil, basically. That entire aspect of having Billy's mom pose as a local news reporter and hang around crime scenes while still avoiding not only Nev Campbell's character, but a bunch of characters in that movie.
A lot of Woodsboro people went to that college.
Yeah, no, it didn't work at all for me.
And if we're already running dry on the relatives to the first killers, and we're running dry on that in movie 2.
Yeah. And I know there's a whole aspect of Friday the 13th here where it's Mrs. Voorhees is the killer in the original, and then Jason comes in the sequel, and you're basically paying homage and having the son being the killer in the first and the mother in the second. You also go back to the psycho elements, right, in terms of the son and the mother. I get it. There's history, there's legacy there. Let's not intellectualize too much. I don't think it's set up the right way. I'm not convinced it works. Chad, do you think it works better than either of us do?
I think it works better than some of the other sequels.
I don't mind the Laurie Metcalf of it. I don't mind that element.
That's part of it for me of why rewatching it, I didn't mind this one as much, because crazy Laurie Metcalf, I'm just in for that.
Let the theater actors play crazy psycho killers.
Yeah.
Always good.
You know what, though? I also started noticing in the second one, after Randy's killed, they show the mask in the front seat. And I'm like, how many costumes does she have? These masks keep showing up everywhere.
Going back to the diversity aspect of these movies and African-American characters, and this is something that I picked up from Ashley Cullen's book on the franchise, is it was important for Kevin Williamson to bring in African-American characters to open the movie, to sort of have that engagement. It was equally important to have an African-American actor play the cameraman this time around.
And Joel, the best character in the franchise, low-key, the best character.
Played by Dwayne Martin. He plays it great. And he actually is the only character here that acts sensibly. Knowing he's Black, knowing that Black characters don't survive in these scenarios, he just leaves.
It's what you see on social media, like, oh, I would never. And it takes a little bit of like, oh, your old cameraman died. Oh, this person got murdered. Oh, that person got murdered. I'm going to go. And then he doesn't show up again for the rest of the movie until the very end when everything's already happened. And he's like, hey, you need any help with that? That's a really clever, I think kind of tough to pull off, maybe, to have a character say, okay, this is BS. I'm not being in this movie anymore.
And let's not forget Liev Schreiber. Liev Schreiber, I think, is another element.
I like the Cotton Weary.
The Cotton Weary aspect. Liev Schreiber playing Cotton Weary, who was framed for Maureen Prescott, Sidney Prescott's mother murder in the first film, comes back here in like defending his name, plays a pretty substantial role. You think he's part of the whodunit for a while, ends up being a hero. I think he works here. And, ultimately, Scream 2 is a movie that matches Scream 1 in the box office, also does a little bit over $100 million. Doesn't really grow the pot here. But at this point, it totally launches all of these other movies like Scream that every studio wants to come in and make. What's the next hot young cast that we can market to the MTV generation with a really good soundtrack? And of this era of horror movies, we can select what we like, what we don't like. I would still say, out of all of the movies that came out of Scream, I would take Scream 2 over most of them. Maybe all of them. Including I Know What You Did Last Summer, including, what was that?
Final Destination, Idle Hands.
The Faculty. Idle Hands was good. I don't know if I take it over Idle Hands. Jessica Alba, really good in that. I'm not sure. In the category of post-Scream horror for this demographic, I think Scream 2 is better than most, if not the best. I will give it that.
I think it's worth mentioning, or think the state of 80s horror was so dominated by the slasher movie, and then, by the mid-90s, it falls off. And the 90s horror scene was Scream and Scream ripoffs. Like, there was not a whole lot else.
Well, it's really like Halloween, right? You had slashers before Halloween, obviously, but Halloween kind of just unleashes this torrent, and everything kind of wants to be Halloween. Scream is the same thing in the mid-90s. Scream comes out in 96, changes the game, and everybody kind of wants to be that. Before then, you had a lot of supernatural elements with the Freddy and Jason stuff. Halloween is pretty much tired out by this point. So yeah, I think Scream reinvigorates the whole genre. And yeah, even though neither of us really like Scream 2, it's still a high watermark in that era.
Also kind of sucks the energy out of the room, more-wise. Not Scream the franchise, but the Weinstein brothers, the decisions made by the industry in the wake of Scream being such a big success, kind of the lessons the industry learned from it, I feel like are maybe the wrong lessons. What Kevin Williamson was doing was taking tropes and established, accepted character types and being smart and intelligent about subverting them. And then everyone was like, friend group of teens. Just, yeah.
Well, after the very successful release of Scream 2, there's excitement to go back to Scream 3. But at this point, something big happens in society that really changes the approach and tone of what Scream 3 eventually becomes. I'm referring to the April 20th, 1999 tragedy at the Columbine High School in Colorado, the school shooting that kind of sobers everyone up to the idea of like a high school murder mystery and like a bunch of teens getting killed by their classmates.
I don't remember the first time I saw Scream, but that is a core memory for me, is when Columbine happened. Like, everyone remembers where they were. I mean, it's cheesy to say, but
no, it's up there with 9/11. Honestly, I think for people our age, it was big. Obviously, I went to undergrad at the University of Colorado in Boulder, and by the time I start college, there are seniors that were there that day at Columbine. No, I think it was a big part of us growing up. It was a very sobering moment. And because of that impact of that tragedy, I think the appetite of going back to a mean-spirited tone and a very aggressive tone for Scream 3 kind of gets scrapped. And the version of Scream 3 we get, I think, is a massive departure from any other Scream in the franchise. If we look at it without that context of Columbine coming right, during the production, you're kind of confused as to what the point of Scream 3 is.
Why are we looking into the short-lived exploitation cinema career of Sidney Prescott's mother?
Why is the tone all over the place? I told you guys a second ago, when we were watching these movies, Scream 3 plays like a Scooby-Doo movie. It's a Scooby-Doo episode with a gang of people going around trying to unmask the killer. There's an entire haunted house in the third act. There's a lot of jokey moments. Guys, Scream 3 starts with Cotton Weary blasting a Creed song. If you don't start laughing out loud at that point, you will when you wonder why Jay and Silent Bob show up in a cameo for no good reason.
That Cotton Weary, like it's a call from Ghostface that I'm at your girlfriend's house. And doesn't immediately call the police. Hey, can someone do a wellness check on my girlfriend? Like, I think it's a very boring way to approach film criticism, particularly with horror movies of like, oh, I think that doesn't make any sense. But really, like, come on, guys.
Like I said, if you just think of it as a Scooby-Doo movie, as an unofficial Scooby-Doo movie, which, ironically enough, Sarah Michelle Gellar killed off in Scream 2, part of the Scooby-Doo movie, Matthew Lillard in Scream 1. Ended up being in the actual Scooby-Doo movie.
It is the only Scream movie where there only was one killer, which it kind of contributes to the Scooby-Doo straining of credulity. Like, how the hell did he do all that?
Yeah.
But it's Scooby-Doo, so that's how he did it. He Scooby-Doo logicked it.
Yeah. You can't unsee that. After you told me that, Daniel, I was like, yeah, I can't ever see this movie again without thinking of that. And nor would I really want to. The third one for me is like bottom of the barrel.
Yeah, bottom of the barrel. I think it's the worst in franchise. The worst in the franchise. But we have to also understand they needed to take a different tone. I mean, the country was not willing to watch a franchise of a bunch of survivors of a high school massacre go through that again. That just wasn't where the country was. Nobody wanted to make that movie. I don't think anybody would have wanted to see that movie. So yes, seeing it divorced from its social context, you're like, this is awful, because it is. It is awful. But within the social context, it makes perfect sense they went this route. It just sucks.
Like Sidney Prescott volunteering at taking calls at a battered woman's hotline. Like, it feels a little out of place in the horror movie sphere that maybe we expected Scream to exist in. But actually, that was something about Scream 3 that I did not mind. I'm like, all right, somebody's dealing with some trauma here and going to therapy at last, at least.
I think the Neve Campbell character, Sidney Prescott, is really what makes a lot of these movies work in terms of a franchise. You always buy her motivations. You always believe her as a character. She takes the decisions that I wish other characters would take. By that, I mean, I wish other characters were written with the same logic that Sidney is written with.
I'm Sidney Prescott. Of course I have a gun.
Yeah, there's a lot of moments like that in the entire franchise that you really do appreciate from it. Let's not talk about Scream 3 any more than we have to. The movie comes out on February 4th, 2000, opens to $34 million, which is a pretty good opening weekend for the era, but tops out under the $100 million mark with $89 million domestically. And at that point, this seems like a trilogy. Wes Craven is coaxed back to directing the third one. Kevin Williamson doesn't join to do that screenplay. At that point, the screenwriter's out. Wes really wants to move on and do other things. You have a feeling that Scream 3 is it. And unfortunately, it's a low point in it being it. And ultimately, we do have to wait over a decade for Scream to make it back into theaters. In the interim, however, something happens that makes a Scream movie harder to get greenlit. And that's the outsized success of the spoof, Scary Movie, which takes all these tropes, including now the meta tropes from the first three Scream movies, and satirizes all of them as a straight out satire comedy. And those Scream movies are so successful that between Scream 3 and Scream 4, there's a whole mini franchise of Scary Movie movies, and you just don't know how they could ever go back to the well and make Scream scary again. It's a joke at this point. It's impossible to make this into a true horror movie. And I think that aspect of it, of those scary movie sequels being, is well liked and box office hits in their own right, I think that made it much, much harder for Scream 4 to come out and be in existence.
I'm a defender of Scream 4. It did not scare me in any bit of it. I barely think of it as a horror movie, but it was okay.
I agree with you, Rebecca. I like Scream 4 more than I remembered liking it when I first saw it. And in this rewatch, I will defend it. I think it stands alone quite well as part of the series.
Imagine a world where your cinema's digital experience is as unforgettable as the movies you show. At Box Office, we strive to make that world a reality. We offer innovative solutions like custom-built websites, mobile apps, and user-friendly ticketing pages, crafted to meet the unique needs of cinemas. It's all about enhancing customer loyalty and making booking a breeze. Take your cinema's online experience to the next level with Boost. Contact us today at sales@boxoffice.com to learn more.
Unfortunately, I think Scream 4 suffers from a very bad opening sequence. And this is weird to say because Scream 1 through 3 all have really good opening sequence kills. I think the first one is the high watermark. The second one, that opening sequence, 12 minutes long, is the best part of the movie. The third one with Cotton Weary, Liev Schreiber, a main character getting killed off, it was still a good, not great opening sequence. But Scream 4, man, you had a couple of fake outs where there's a movie within a movie element that we're watching. Instead of being edgy and new and bold, it just seemed like a joke. And that just put me back in scary movie mode.
It felt like an excuse to stunt cast people, and have them in for here's Anna Paquin in our movie for 2 minutes.
Yeah, no, I think so too. I think it struggles to recover from that. I think the opening sequence is so poorly handled that the rest of the movie tries to win you back. It won me back. It sounds like it won Rebecca back. Chad, it didn't get to you as much.
No, maybe because I remembered watching for like a year or two after the fact, like catching up with it. And my memory of it was like, oh, that one actually was pretty good. Revisiting it, I just couldn't get into it. I think, like you said, Daniel, the beginning opening thing, it feels like a sequence from Scary Movie. And I couldn't get back into it after that.
Yeah. I completely understand. The other thing that Scream 4 has working against it is that horror moves on from like the teen horror franchise that the original Scream spawns. At this point, beginning with the release, I think, of 2004 Saw, you get squarely into the post-torture porn era, because obviously 2004 to maybe 2010 is when you get Hostel, you get Saw, you get the really graphic, violent movies that in itself, these movies are coming out while the entire mess of the Iraq-Afghanistan war is coming out, and you hear about all these torture techniques. Again, I don't think these things exist in a bubble. I think there's a very clear overlap between U.S. foreign policy at that time and what horror is kind of going through. So when Scream 4 comes in at the tail end of that torture porn era, it's kind of lost between eras because elevated horror that comes in at the end of the 2010s isn't quite there yet.
Well, horror at this point, I believe Scream 4 came out 2011? Which is the same year that Ryan Murphy dipped his toe into horror, going from Glee to American Horror Story. And that just kicked off a completely, I feel like it was the Ryan Murphy TV horror, where it was all big celebrities. It was like, oh, you never thought you would be seeing, I don't know, insert Jessica to, you never thought you would be seeing Lady Gaga do crazy, stuff like this on a horror show. And yeah, the torture porn, the Hostel, it was either, very, very gritty or very, very big budget splashy, but not adding up to anything. And where do you, horror was finding itself in that decade for
horror
sure.
Was finding itself.
I mean, horror's always finding itself, but yeah.
Yeah, always. It's always a reflection, right, of what's going on in society, things that we're kind of dealing with. I think that's a weird time in that, in hindsight, I can see that link between the never-ending wars post 9/11 that the George W. Bush administration set forth, and how maybe a lot of those tensions about how do we define torture? And even having that conversation is kind of hard to believe that we had to have it as a nation for as long as we did. As those conversations are happening, that the fact that the very act of torture is the central aesthetic and horror of that era, it's clear to me now in hindsight. As it was happening, I had no interest in sort of engaging with it.
Or just high-key escapism, which fits in well with the Scream franchise, the whole true crime horror, connection there. And that's something that I really enjoyed about Scream 4 is the motivation behind one of the two killers. Emma Roberts' character would go on to be a Ryan Murphy mainstay as well. I kind of like how that she resents her cousin Sydney for what she perceives as, unjustly having gotten famous off the back of something that happened to her that was horrible. It kind of got into the generational divide a little bit of pre and post social media and it kind of has that like Hollywood dynasty. I mean, Emma Roberts obviously being a member of a very, famous family in Hollywood as well. I dug that element of it where for once the kill was not about what happened to Maureen Prescott. By the time I got to 3 with her secret son, like it got way too up its own rear end about that.
You closed the Sidney Prescott chapter at Scream 3. I think Scream 3 really made this feel like a trilogy. The 10 years had passed. You feel that story is told. But there are strong elements to it, I think, like you say, Rebecca. I think because of the Scary Movie franchise, Scream 4, in comparison to everything that came before it, is a lot gorier, a lot meaner, and a lot more brutal when it comes to the kills. The kill sequences have a level of intensity and meanness to them and aggressiveness.
Kills her mom. Like, kills her own mom.
They're very graphic.
Yeah.
Very, very graphic in a way that I think in this instance is good for the franchise because it needs to distinguish itself from the jokey elements of 3 and the parodies that came before it.
The scene when she's like throwing herself on the glass table and injuring herself to make it like that's a legit good scene.
No, there's a lot of good, I think, here, but I think it had to also take a darker tone because of everything that was immediately there before it. This was also meant to launch a new trilogy. Scream 4 was going to introduce the Emma Roberts character and that great twist, which I agree with you completely, Rebecca. I love the aspect of the final girl being the killer. That is the best part of this movie. I absolutely adore that.
That twist. Is the cool person you want to be.
Yeah. And I think Emma Roberts is great. It also speaks to the true crime elements that Chad brings up in the sense that this is the era of the true crime celebrity victim. That is a real thing. And only a couple of years after this, I think the novel Gone Girl comes out, which takes that to another key, right? Where the celebrity true crime victim becomes the orchestrator. I think Gone Girl and Scream 4 have a lot in common. They're having the same conversation on what's happening in society at the same time in parallel tracks. I think that's fascinating about this movie. Ultimately, I don't think the movie gets its head around the social media aspect of it all, because it does try to take like the live streaming component, the make your own movie, the DIY-ness, the found footageness of it all. I'm not sure it gets that down correctly, but there's enough here to make this a true horror movie with a great twist, a great whodunit element. I'm not sure that the new generation, that the new cast of characters that get introduced here is quite as likable, or the casting is quite as effective as it was in Scream 1. So that generational passing of the torch doesn't quite land. But Emma Roberts is great. And Hayden Panettiere, who keeps on popping up in a couple more sequels, I think it's another bright spot.
Rory Culkin was good. It's a big step up from Scream 3, though sadly it did not make nearly as much money as that did. That Scream 4 is definitely the low point of the series.
Yeah, that's what derails the planned trilogy. Scream 4 was going to be introducing the Emma Roberts twist, and then according to the book, Your Favorite Scary Movie, How the Scream Films Rewrote the Rules of Horror by Ashley Collins, she does a really good job of going in and laying out what the other elements of the trilogy were going to be. Scream 5 would be more centered on the Emma Roberts character, getting away with the murders and going to college where there's another Ghostface attacking her. So it's Ghostface versus Ghostface, which kind of gets recycled a little bit.
Kinda.
Yeah, exactly. That gets recycled in Scream 6 a little bit. So that's a working element for the planned Scream 5 that gets recycled later on. And then Scream 6 was going to go back to Sidney Prescott and tackle her relationship, which is what we're getting in Scream 7. So the blueprint for what Scream 4 was going to launch was there. But as you note, the financial performance wasn't bad. It was awful. It opened to $18 million. Good enough. Opens in April 2011. But it tops out at $38 million. Barely a 2x multiple. And that's just bad figures. Now, I remember watching this in the Upper East Side here in New York City. Chad, where did you see this?
I didn't see it until I think a couple years after it had come out. I missed it in theaters completely. Kind of caught up.
Well, apparently a lot of other people did too.
I think I saw it after 6 because I was like, "Who is Caden Panettiere?" All right, I assume she's someone that I missed.
So Rebecca, you just skipped it. Period. You didn't even go back to it eventually.
No, I'd kind of gathered its reputation as something that a little bit of an outlier, but people still liked. I feel like it's gotten that sort of cult status a little bit. Which, I mean, you throw a stone. Any horror movie can have a selection of crazy people online insisting that it's a maligned masterpiece, and I definitely do not say that meanly because I do it with a lot of stuff too. But it was a catch up on home video for me, for sure.
No, that's interesting to hear. Yeah, I believe I either saw this at the Cinema 1, 2, 3 in the Upper East Side or at the AMC Orpheum 7. I forget which one it was. At the time, I didn't love it. I didn't hate it, but it was in rewatching it that I really dug it a lot more.
That Stabathon set piece at the middle where it's kind of an underground 24-hour fest of all the previous Stab movies. I thought that was a fun set piece.
Yeah. It's definitely playful. And you can definitely see where it wants to use Scream 4 as a platform for a new generation, but it doesn't quite get there. But as we noted earlier, there were enough elements of what the plans would be that got recycled in Scream 5 and Scream 6, and even in the upcoming Scream 7, that the blueprint at least was there. So at this point, let's fast forward to a movie that we covered on this podcast. That's how far along we are in the timeline. In the post-pandemic box office, Scream 5 came out in January of 2022 during a time when the industry desperately needed movies to go out there, connect with audiences, perform, but it was still very much a post-pandemic era ramp-up. Scream 5 hitting theaters in January of 2022, as we mentioned, still very much in the welcoming audiences back to the movies part of the post-pandemic. It was a hit, I think, in that era, even though the box office numbers are lower than the first two Scream movies. An $80 million domestic take is more than double what Scream 4 did in very much pre-pandemic times. And that really launches more sequels, the sequels that we're seeing right now. What happened to the franchise in the interim is that obviously Miramax, Dimension Films, the Weinstein Company, that isn't the thing anymore.
In more ways than one.
For good reason. Yeah. So the rights are in a weird limbo. They get picked up by, I believe, Spyglass as the company picks it up. They recruit Radio Silence Productions, the filmmaking and production team behind a number of other horror films, to come in, retool the script, direct it. They get involved with producers. I think a communal and collaborative effort to retool this. And here's where I'm going to give these guys great credit. And by the way, we interviewed them on the podcast for Scream 5. We'll have that in the show notes, that conversation we had with them. I think they did a terrific job. And in my opinion, Scream 5 is the best sequel and almost as good as Scream 1. I think for me, Scream 1, Scream 5, and then there's a big drop off for everything else. I absolutely love it. And rewatching it just now for this podcast, I liked it even more. Chad, do you remember watching this?
Yeah, I do. I agree with you. Here's my hot take. Rewatching all these, watch 1, go directly to 5. I think Paramount was so smart in rebooting it. And you don't really, I mean, other than the nostalgia for us because we grew up with them, but watch Scream and then watch Scream. Yeah.
I think that's also done a little bit on purpose because, of course, the whole point of it being called Scream again is because it's going back to the whole requel part of it all, where you're having the legacy sequels and the legacy reboots.
Yeah.
And this is what Halloween did. Halloween, under David Gordon Green, basically retconned everything after the first one and released a sequel called Halloween, and it was really good. The sequels weren't that good, but the first David Gordon Green Halloween was great. And if you just skip from Halloween 1 to David Gordon Green's Halloween, you're going to have a really good time with the movies. I feel it's the same thing here, Chad. I agree with you.
It feels like there is a point of view. It was a real, like, they hired Radio Silence to kind of steer this ship and let them do what they needed to do. It felt like there wasn't so much studio interference or direction from the studio, which obviously, as we'll discuss, changes in 6. I mean, you could, get to me like a couple of years ago and say that the new Scream franchise would involve Skeet Ulrich's mystery daughter, born out of wedlock, and I'd be like, there's no way in hell. That sounds...
It's cheesy. It's a dumb plot point. There's also a Skeet Ulrich ghost. Don't forget there's ghosts in this thing now.
Yeah.
Well, is it ghosts or is she psychotic? I think she's on antipsychotics. It sounds
funnier if I say ghosts. It sounds a little silly and funny if I'm just going to say ghost. I love ghosts.
Is
so maybe
Skeet Ulrich. Like it's yeah.
There's so much about this that shouldn't work, but it kind of perfectly works.
Mm-hmm.
Or even what doesn't work kind of tongue-in-cheek knows that it's a big swing. But it takes bold swings. And for the most part, they're highly effective. And I think, obviously, what Scream 5 does is goes back to the meta elements and creates a meta commentary on sequels, franchises, reboots, and toxic fan culture, because that's at the heart of Scream 5 is the toxic fan, and specifically because he's called out in name in several parts of this film, director Rian Johnson, who directed one of the Star Wars sequels, Star Wars The Last Jedi, the second part of the new trilogy for Lucasfilm. And that movie, just the entire online debate and meltdown by its toxic fandom.
It was a weird time to be online.
Because of that toxic fandom, I think we end up having Scream 5. And the movie actually references it, where I think it's Rian Johnson that ends up directing Stab 8 in the Scream universe.
Oh, I didn't catch that.
They actually call him out by name.
It's a shame to be a Stab movie.
Right. Like, it's kind of also foreshadows what happens in Scream 6, where they say, oh, Sidney Prescott isn't even in the last one. That ends up happening anyway in the following Scream movie. So it's a really good meta element in where IP is today, because it was made, fairly recently as we record this. It worked for me on every single level. I think the new generation of characters, obviously anchored by Melissa Barrera and Jenna Ortega, are great. The soap opera elements of the long lost daughter of Billy Loomis are stupid and silly and ridiculous. With the age, Skeet Ulrich doesn't really work, but it's so charming.
It's like how they make it the final girl's boyfriend and his weird little high school friend did it again, and it comes as something of a surprise.
Surprise,
yeah.
Mikey Madison, Oscar winner, Academy Award winner Mikey Madison. Fantastic performance for by the way. And I had to look this up. Her other big role before Enora was in Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
On fire.
She gets burned to death.
She keeps getting on fire.
She ends up set on fire on both these movies.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad that's not how Enora ended. I think Enora's ending is a lot darker than that.
I mean, metaphorically, it kind of ended with billionaires burning everything down, but yeah. But yeah, Scream.
Yeah, I had a great
Scream 5. The only thing I just don't. I'm a pedant about just naming conventions. Just call it Scream 5.
Yeah, but that's the whole point. They're playing with the Halloween reboot thing that happened in horror. It's self-reflexive. It's meta. That's what it's going for. And they actually discuss it explicitly in the film. I mean, you rewatch it.
All right, keep the name Scream, but it's a bridge too far for me to have Scream 6 be Roman numerals and then Scream 7 be back to Arabic numerals, which I get is referential as well. I get, but like Scream VI was not fun enough for me to pull that off. I don't know. It needed to be a bit more tongue in cheek.
I do want to give a shout out to Scream 5 actually employing a diverse cast in the film and referencing how in this era of franchises and IP, movies that were predominantly white in the past now have magically a diverse cast in there, and how the toxic fan culture repudiates that and pushes that away. We actually have gay characters. We actually have principal characters that are African American and mixed race in the film. You have Latina characters headlining this franchise. I enjoyed that. It doesn't pat itself on the back for it, but it also sort of addresses how that's a criticism where that the new Star Wars movies had, the new Star Wars trilogy had, for example.
Like, why are you shoehorning in high school that looks like a normal high school?
Unless you live in a very non-urban part of this country, that's how a lot of parts of this country look like. There's a good amount of diversity. And by the way, the people that go watch these movies look like the people that are in this movie. So I like that element of addressing, the ethnicities of the main character, the toxic fan culture around those reactions.
I like seeding in minor characters from the sequels. Randy Meeks's sister being the mother to the twins, and then the sheriff's deputy. It was a nice way to kind of maintain continuity and tie the two eras together. But if you weren't familiar with particularly familiar with Scream 3 or 4, then it wasn't really gonna come back and bite you all that much. Yeah, good kills, good set pieces. The one thing I don't love about, I think, Scream 5 and 6 is the level of groundedness in relation to the kills is just off the... How many times can David Arquette get stabbed? And you have ostensibly Mikey Madison supposed to be the one doing that. Like I know we're the suspension of disbelief. We're not really actually supposed to believe that Laurie Metcalf was in, that Ghostface garb tussling, but it was a little bit just a little.
I mean, doesn't she lift David Arquette off the ground? It's hard to.
Yeah. She listens and slams him, and it read how much can we put your fan favorite character through the ringer? And that just felt a little bit. You're better than that.
That's a big criticism I have of the radio silence movies, of both 5 and 6, like you. I think if you're going to stab a character 37 times in a scene and have them suffer in front of you, there have to be stakes there, and they have to die. So I hope Dewey is dead. I would be very upset if he comes back.
They pulled it Bill Weathers is 99%. Oh, no, she's not. Never mind. But whether she dies depends on how much money Courtney Cox wants for whichever sequel she appears in.
Exactly, right? No, I completely agree with you. I think that is the worst aspect of both Scream 5 and Scream 6. They're superheroes. They're unkillable. And it's funny if it's Dewey. If it's Dewey, meek, bumbling Deputy Dewey that keeps on getting stabbed a billion times and keeps on coming back. It's funny when it's just him. When it's every character in an ensemble, you lose track. There's no stakes to that.
Shout out to poor Dewey, divorced alcoholic living in a trailer. It's sad. It's sad.
And by the way, this was the best movie rules sequence about how reboot requels work that you've had since the first one. Yeah, I absolutely adored this movie. I saw this, I believe, at the AMC Lincoln Square. Rebecca, you remember where you watched this?
It would have been the AMC Times Square.
Actually, it might have been with you that I saw it at the AMC Times Square in the All Media. Because I definitely remember watching Scream 6 with you at the All Media in Regal Union Square here in New York City, right around when that came out, Scream 6. In
2023, right? They rushed it. They pulled a Scream 1 to Scream 2 pipeline of we got to get this out next year because it did so well for Q1.
Yeah,
and you can tell.
I think that's what you can tell. There's something that you called out on this podcast, Rebecca. I remember you saying hey, Scream 5 was so good. Do we really need to have Scream 6 14 months after the last one? It felt a little bit rushed. I like Scream 6 better than Scream 2, but I do think it's in the lower tier here once we get to Scream 6.
I just don't get what it's going for. I mean, so much of what made Scream 5 work and feel relevant and feel recognizable was that toxic fan culture element of what's motivating the bad guys. What's motivating the villains in 6 is, what are they trying to say? The family of the boyfriend of killer from the first one set up a shrine and was also making fan films of the stab movies. What is it saying about horror except that it has no understanding of how alleys in New York should not be bright, well lit? If you're going to do the whole this is the one where we go to New York, do a Jason Takes Manhattan one and have like Ghostface rampaging through Times Square or something. Like have a point of view and not just like we need to switch this up in a big way because we didn't want to pay Neve Campbell what she wants.
Well, I think the big problem is if you're going to set it in New York, and maybe this is just a New Yorker thing that we have. If you set it in New York, don't shoot in Canada. Use it as a character. Don't shoot in Canada. Don't fake your way out of it. It looks silly. It looks obvious. You can fake it. The subway stuff works well. And look, before I hit the New York aspect of it, I do want to address something you brought up, the killer motivations, because I agree with you. The killer motivations in Scream 6 ruin Scream 6. But I do think that the killer motivations make the movie stronger or weaker depending on how good they are. In Scream 1, the killer motivations are Billy Loomis, a family beef that he has with Sydney, and then Stu Macher, played by Matthew Lillard, has a really good motivation, which is the quote at the center of that screenplay for Scream existing, quote, "Movies don't create killers, movies make killers more creative."
Mm-hmm. He's just a jackass. That's his motivation. And what's the line
right?
from
and
the
I think that works really well.
It's the millennium. We don't need motives anymore, something to that effect.
Yeah, well, for Scream 2, you have Billy Loomis's mother repeating the whole family beef. And then Timothy Oliphant's character, the difficult film student, his whole thing is, I'm going to blame the movies in the trial. So it's the whole celebrity trial thing.
That's with the Cotton Mather thing of I'm going to monetize this.
Exactly. And it also juxtaposes the whole Stu Macher motivation of it's not that movies make people into psychos, they make psychos more creative. In the second one, it's like, no, I'm just going to blame the movies and it's not going to be me. I'm going to be scot-free. Scream 3 suffers a lot because the motivation is weak. It goes back to family in a weird sort of retcon of why Billy Loomis was involved in Scream 1 anyway, which I think is why it's so weak of a reveal and weak of a film. Scream 4, I think the reason why we like it as much as we did is because the victim thing is really good. The celebrity victim aspect of it all is fresh, is fun, is socially relevant in the era of true crime heroes. It predates the whole Gone Girl twist. I think it works wonderfully. Scream 5, the toxic fandom thing. Guys, we worked in this industry when that movie came out. That toxic fandom thing seemed like a really, really good motivation. And then Scream 6, you have a crappy motivation. It's going back to like, you killed our son. It didn't work at all.
You killed my son who was a serial killer and I'm mad about it. Like, okay, go on. Like, give us something else.
It very much parallels Scream 2, right? You even have that kind of theatrical setting where the reveals all happen on a stage.
The shrine in the abandoned New York City movie theater that's meant to be in where?
I'm sorry, who's paying rent on that? Someone, and if no one's paying rent on that, that's going to turn into Gristrides in like 2 weeks. That place is going to be right full of rats. No, I don't buy it for a second.
How many people without like homes were like sleeping under movie seats during all that final fight was going on? Just like, it's, I don't know, like Dermot Mulroney's a cop who his son, Dermot
Mulroney's a cop and his son, unbeknownst to Melissa Barrera's character, was the serial killer. And then he also has a daughter that is her roommate now, and she doesn't know that either. And he also has another son that nobody knows. It takes way too many soap opera leaps here, and none of them make sense. There's too many of these like soap opera screenwriting express shortcuts that aren't fair to the characters at all.
The sister plot line of, oh, you have to let me go. You're too overprotective because, of who your dad was. A serial killer was targeting me and my friends like a year ago. Both of the actresses in it were very good. They did what they needed to do. They were just given weak material. None of it felt earned. It all felt very rushed.
Yes. And I will say this about the movie, though. I agree with you that the story sucks, that the script doesn't really make a lot of sense, but the set pieces are great. The set pieces are among the best in the franchise. It's so well directed.
The opening kill is really great.
With Samara Weaving playing the most attractive film studies professor of all time. I never had a film professor in my 6 years that looked anywhere near that.
There's no way she's having to do online dating.
No, not in a billion years. Are you kidding me? So Samara Weaving gets killed off in the beginning with like a good fake out. It wasn't great. It's a little cheesy with first, you set up the whole opening sequence, you kill off Samara Weaving, and then you follow Ghostface, right? There's a Ghostface killer reveal in the opening. And then I think for all of us watching, I'm assuming what Radio Silence wanted us to think is, oh my God, are we going to follow the Ghostface perspective for the rest of the film because Neve Campbell isn't in it? Because Neve Campbell for Scream 6 doesn't come back because they lowball her in terms of payment. So she steps out. So at that point, you're thinking, ooh, maybe Scream 6 is from the perspective of Ghostface. But there's a fake out. Another Ghostface kills that Ghostface. But that aspect, I think, was disorienting and cheesy in the way that the fourth one, Scream 4, was disorienting and cheesy. It didn't work for me.
It's like a metaphorical, we're taking the conceit of the superfan film bro who takes everything way too seriously, and that's the bad guy, and we're killing him off. Fine, replace it with something else. Replace it with something. And I mean, the set pieces, I did really like that, the Easter eggs of the subway scene when so many people were dressed as like horror icons, including some as Samara Weaving's character from Ready or Not, another Radio Silence film.
The Babadook is in there.
Yeah.
Babadook plays a nice little surprise cameo. The twins from Us. There's a lot of little Easter eggs there. By the way, that subway sequence, I think, I would even say, after the opening sequence in Scream 1, my second favorite sequence in any Scream movie is the subway sequence in Scream 6. Perfectly directed. I would actually also like to praise the bodega sequence when Ghostface gets the shotgun. That got a lot of criticism from fans on like, Ghostface doesn't use a shotgun, which was funny because if you remember in Scream 5, the fan reactions to the fictional Stab 8 directed by Ryan Johnson is that he uses a flamethrower and how Ghostface can only use knives. So they're commenting on their own movies. It's actually, I appreciated that a lot. I even think that the kill where you have the heroes escape from one apartment building to the other using a ladder, there's a lot of set pieces here. When you add them up, you're like, this is well written. This is well directed. The problem is it's a type of movie that is set piece first and script second, and that works for Mission Impossible. That works for James Bond. Maybe, right? That maybe works for Mission Impossible. That maybe works for James Bond. It doesn't work for a horror movie where the only way you're into it is if you believe the characters and the relationships they have with one another. And I didn't buy any of those for a second. It's a great shot, great directed movie that suffers from a bad script.
Yeah, like Melissa Barrera's like hot, shirtless boyfriend who she's hiding from her sister because nothing against that actor. He was fine, but it just felt very, very arbitrary, very rushed, very first draft.
As you were saying with that, Rebecca, I feel like I would love to see what the version of this franchise would have looked like if they have taken their time throughout all these sequels.
If we keep with the Scream 1 to Scream 2 SAT prep, comparison, Scream 5 and Scream 6, Scream 7 is the new Scream 3. It's hewing pretty close to the previous trilogy already. So hopefully it breaks the trend there.
We're hoping that it does, because obviously Scream 3 was just abysmal in almost every aspect. Yeah, I don't know where Scream 6 goes wrong, other than to say, I think it could have used a better rewrite or a couple more rewrites, a little bit more time. I understand rushing into production for Scream 2 because you have Neve Campbell and Courtney Cox in massive TV shows, where if you don't shoot in May, you wait a year, and God knows where the industry is then. You kind of have to jump on those opportunities. I even understand Scream 7 having to say goodbye to Jenny Ortega. Her career took off. Okay, I get it. The Melissa Barrera thing, I'm not going to wade into. Every employer has a say in how they manage their businesses and what they consider is acceptable and not. That's between the production and the actors. I'm sure we all have personal opinions on that, but that seems like a workplace dispute, and we'll leave it at that rather than walking into the bear trap of commenting any further. But for Scream 7, I think the smart idea was to realize that Scream 6 was a movie with really good set pieces, a really bad script, and maybe we move on. Maybe we take what we can salvage and we take it back to character. And you go back to the screenwriter that set this in motion, you let him direct, and you see where he can take the character, because that's what we lost in Scream 6. The set pieces, like I said, are as good as ever. I think there's better Scream set pieces in the sixth installment then in most others, it's just everything around it isn't up to par. So with Scream 7, that's my wish, is that you put Kevin Williamson there and the care that he has for the Sidney Prescott character, and you can deliver a movie that can close that story. I don't want to see Neve Campbell dragged into too many sequels moving forward, but I do kind of want to wrap that up and figure out what the next ones are going to be.
It feels strange that their first impulse on rebooting Scream was not to go with daughter of Sidney Prescott. And I'm glad they didn't. I'm glad they took the risk of, making these new characters and they made it work. But all right, it feels like this is, we know Sidney Prescott has daughters. This feels natural. It feels normal. Like, I hope that the male twin, he just ended 6 with the Dewey Cox treatment of getting stabbed like 8,000 times.
Honestly, all of them have been stabbed. Even Courtney Cox, even Neve Campbell. Just stop it. Like, if you're going to hurt these people, have it have stakes, have it last, right? It's ridiculous at this point. Now, financially, Scream 6, even though it wasn't remotely our favorite, was the best performer in the franchise. Franchise best opening weekend of $44 million in March of 2023. Domestic run of $108 million. So the first 2 Screams did around a little bit over $100 million in the late 90s. But of course, that's under a significantly lower ticket price. We do expect this latest installment to beat the performance of all the ones that preceded it. And I, for one, am excited. I'm excited because I haven't had too many reasons to be excited about going to the movies. I've seen a total of 1 new theatrical release in 2026 so far, and it was Crime 101, and I loved it. I had a great time at the GTC Trilith location down in Georgia watching it. When I can find a couple hours for myself to go to the movies and forget about the weather outside and the situation happening where I'm from, I am really going to enjoy that bit of escapism. And I hope other folks do too. I think the industry is ready for a movie like this weekend.
February is the worst month, objectively, just like on a spiritual level. We're all ready for February to be over. We need a nice, fun horror movie to like kick it out the door.
I can't wait. And I will say it's kind of cool that none of us are watching this in a press screening because you lose a lot. When you watch things in a press screening, I do think it dulls the experience slightly. You want a paying audience to watch this with. I think that's a fair gauge of how a movie works and how it doesn't. So, I'll try to escape to watch this. I'm going to check out the showtimes at my local Look Dine-In here in Dobbs Ferry to see when I can go next week. Rebecca, I know you're an AMC A-lister. I'm assuming that's probably where you're going to hit it up. It's on IMAX, by the way. It's the first Scream on IMAX.
Okay, interesting. Because this is Kevin Williamson's first movie as a director, right?
Yes, I don't know if it was shot in IMAX. It might be just reformatted in it. It's also what else are you going to put on IMAX this weekend? Like, it'd be dumb not to put it on IMAX. But, you take your pick of HDR. Barco HDR that's available in a lot of Regal locations.
Oh, I'm going to do Dolby. I want the comfy seats.
A lot of good options. Well, thank you to everyone for listening to this very long look back at all of the Scream movies. We will have in our show notes our episode with the directors of Scream 5, a great conversation we had a couple of years back here on the Box Office Podcast. And we'll be back with a new episode of our show on Thursday of next week. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you again real soon.